Seventh, the next 3 or 4 weeks flew by in a whirl of excitement, and by the time they were ended, I found it hard to recognize myself in the indolent, listless, extravagant man of fashion I had so suddenly become. Sometimes, at stray and solitary moments, the past turned back upon me like a revolving picture in a glass, with a flash of unwelcome recollection, and I saw myself worn and hungry and shabbily clothed, bending over my writing in my dreary lodging, wretched, yet amid all my wretchedness, receiving curious comfort from my own thoughts, which created beauty out of penury and love out of loneliness. This creative faculty was now dormant in me. I did very little and thought less, but I felt certain that this intellectual apathy was but a passing phase, a mental holiday and desirable cessation from brain work to which I was deservedly entitled after all my sufferings at the hands of poverty and disappointment. My book was nearly through the press, and perhaps the chiefest pleasure of any I now enjoyed was the correction of the proofs as they passed under my supervision. Yet even this, the satisfaction of authorship, had its drawback, and my particular grievance was somewhat singular. I read my own work with gratification, of course, for I was not behind my contemporaries in thinking well of myself in all I did, but my complacent literary egoism was mixed with a good deal of disagreeable astonishment and incredulity, because my work, written with enthusiasm and feeling, propounded sentiments and inculcated theories which I personally did not believe in. Now, how had this happened? I asked myself. Why had I thus invited the public to accept me at a false valuation? I paused to consider, and I found the suggestion puzzling. How came I to write the book at all, seeing that it was utterly unlike me as I now knew myself? My pen, consciously or unconsciously, had written down things which my reasoning faculties entirely repudiated, such as belief in a God, trust in the eternal possibilities of man's diviner progress. I credited neither of these doctrines. When I imagined such transcendental and foolish dreams, I was poor, starving, and without a friend in the world. Remembering all this, I promptly set down my so-called inspiration to the action of an ill-nourished brain. Yet there was something subtle in the teaching of the story, and one afternoon, when I was revising some of the last proof sheets, I caught myself thinking that the book was nobler than its writer. This idea smote me with a sudden pang. I pushed my papers aside and, walking to the window, looked out. It was raining hard, and the streets were black with mud and slush. The foot passengers were drenched and miserable. The whole prospect was dreary, and the fact that I was a rich man did not in the least lift from my mind the depression that had stolen on me unawares. I was quite alone, for I had my own suite of rooms now in the hotel, not far from those occupied by Prince Rimanes. I also had my own servant, a respectable, good sort of fellow, whom I rather liked because he shared to the full the instinctive aversion I felt for the prince's man, Amiel. Then I had my own carriage and horses with attendant coachman and groom, so that the prince and I, though the most intimate friends in the world, were able to avoid that familiarity which breeds contempt by keeping up our own separate establishments. On this particular afternoon, I was in a more miserable humour than ever my poverty had brought upon me, yet from a strictly reasonable point of view, I had nothing to be miserable about. I was in full possession of my fortune. I enjoyed excellent health, and I had everything I wanted, with the added consciousness that if my wants increased, I could gratify them easily. The paragraph wheel, under Lucio's management, had been worked with such good effect that I had seen myself mentioned in almost every paper in London and the provinces as the famous millionaire, and for the benefit of the public, who are sadly uninstructed on these matters, I may here state as a very plain, unvarnished truth that for £40 a well-known agency will guarantee the insertion of any paragraph, provided it is not libellous, in no less than 400 newspapers. The art of booming is thus easily explained, and level-headed people will be able to comprehend why it is that a few names of authors are constantly mentioned in the press, while others, perhaps more deserving, remain ignored. Merit counts as nothing in such circumstances. Money wins the day. And the persistent paragraphing of my name, together with a description of my personal appearance and my marvelous literary gifts, combined with a deferential and almost awestruck allusion to the millions which made me so interesting. The paragraph was written out by Lucio and handed for circulation to the agency aforesaid with money down. All this, I say, brought upon me two inflictions. First, any amount of invitations to social and artistic functions, and secondly, a continuous stream of begging letters. I was compelled to employ a secretary who occupied a room near my suite and who was kept hard at work all day. Needless to say, I refused all appeals for money. No one had helped me in my distress, with the exception of my old chum, Boffleys. No one save he had given me even so much as a word of sympathy. I was resolved now to be as hard and as merciless as I had found my contemporaries. I had a certain grim pleasure in reading letters from 2 or 3 literary men, asking for work as secretary or companion, or failing that, for the loan of a little cash to tide over present difficulties. One of these applicants was a journalist on the staff of a well-known paper who had promised to find me work, and who, instead of doing so, had, as I afterwards learned, strongly dissuaded his editor from giving me any employment. He never imagined that Tempest the millionaire and Tempest the literary hack were one and the same person. So little do the majority think that wealth can ever fall to the lot of authors. I wrote to him myself, however, and told him what I deemed it well he should know, adding my sarcastic thanks for his friendly assistance to me in time of need, and herein I tasted something of the sharp delight of vengeance. I never heard from him again, and I am pretty sure my letter gave him material not only for astonishment but meditation. Yet, with all the advantages over both friends and enemies which I now possessed, I could not honestly say I was happy. I knew I could have every possible enjoyment and amusement the world had to offer. I knew I was one of the most envied among men, and yet, as I stood looking out of the window at the persistently falling rain, I was conscious of a bitterness rather than a sweetness in the full cup of fortune. Many things that I had imagined would give me intense satisfaction had fallen curiously flat. For example, I had flooded the press with the most carefully worded and prominent advertisements of my forthcoming book, and when I was poor, I had pictured to myself how I should revel in doing this. Now that it was done, I cared nothing at all about it. I was simply weary of the sight of my own advertised name. I certainly did look forward with very genuine feeling and expectation to the publication of my work when that should be an accomplished fact. But today, even that idea had lost some of its attractiveness owing to this new and unpleasant impression on my mind that the contents of that book were as utterly the reverse of my own true thoughts as they could well be. A fog began to darken down over the streets in company with the rain, and disgusted with the weather and with myself, I turned away from the window and settled into an armchair by the fire, poking the coal till it blazed, and wondering what I should do to rid my mind of the gloom that threatened to envelop it in as thick a canopy as that of the London fog. A tap came at the door, and in answer to my somewhat irritable "Come in," Romanes entered. "What? All in the dark, Tempest?" he exclaimed cheerfully. "Why don't you light up?" "The fire's enough," I answered crossly. "Enough at any rate to think by." "And have you been thinking?" he inquired, laughing. "Don't do it. It's a bad habit. No one thinks nowadays. People can't stand it. Their heads are too frail. Once begin to think and down go the foundations of society. Besides, thinking is always dull work." "I have found it so," I said gloomily. "Lucio, there is something wrong about me somewhere." His eyes flashed keen, half-amused inquiry into mine. "Wrong? Oh no, surely not. What can there be wrong about you, Tempest? Are you not one of the richest men living?" I let the satire pass. "Listen, my friend," I said earnestly. "You know I have been busy for the last fortnight correcting the proofs of my book for the press. Do you not?" He nodded with a smiling air. "Well, I have arrived almost at the end of my work, and I have come to the conclusion that the book is not me. It is not a reflex of my feelings at all, and I cannot understand how I came to write it." "You find it stupid, perhaps?" said Lucio sympathetically. "No," I answered with a touch of indignation. "I do not find it stupid." "Dull, then?" "No. It is not dull. Melodramatic? No, not melodramatic. Well, my good fellow, if it is not dull or stupid or melodramatic, what is it? He exclaimed merrily. It must be something. Yes, it is this. It is beyond me altogether. And I spoke with some bitterness. Quite beyond me. I could not write it now. I wonder I could write it then. Lucio, I dare say I am talking foolishly, but it seems to me I must have been on some higher altitude of thought when I wrote the book, a height from which I have since fallen. I'm sorry to hear this, he answered with twinkling eyes. From what you say, it appears to me you have been guilty of literary sublimity. Oh, bad, very bad. Nothing can be worse. To write sublimely is a grievous sin, and one which critics never forgive. I'm really grieved for you, my friend. I never thought your case was quite so desperate. I laughed in spite of my depression. You are incorrigible, Lucio, I said, but your cheerfulness is very inspiriting. All I wanted to explain to you is this, that my book expresses a certain tone of thought which, purporting to be mine, is not me. In short, I, in my present self, have no sympathy with it. I must have changed very much since I wrote it. Changed? Why, yes, I should think so. And Lucio laughed heartily. The possession of 5 millions is bound to change a man considerably for the better, or worse. But you seem to be worrying yourself most absurdly about nothing. Not one author in many centuries writes from his own heart or as he truly feels. When he does, he becomes well nigh immortal. This planet is too limited to hold more than one Homer, one Plato, one Shakespeare. Don't distress yourself. You are neither of these three. You belong to the age, Tempest. It is a decadent, ephemeral age, and most things connected with it are decadent and ephemeral. Any era that is dominated by the love of money only has a rotten core within it and must perish. All history tells us so, but no one accepts the lesson of history. Observe the signs of the time. Art is made subservient to the love of money. Literature, politics, and religion the same. You cannot escape from the general disease. The only thing to do is to make the best of it. No one can reform it, least of all you, who have so much of the lucre given to your share. He paused. I was silent, watching the bright fire glow and the dropping red cinders. What I am going to say now, he proceeded in soft, almost melancholy accents, will sound ridiculously trite. Still, it has the perverse prosiness of truth about it. It is this: in order to write with intense feeling, you must first feel. Very likely, when you wrote this book of yours, you were almost a human hedgehog in the way of feeling. Every prickly point of you was erect and responsive to the touch of all influences, pleasant or the reverse, imaginative or realistic. This is a condition which some people envy and others would rather dispense with. Now that you, as a hedgehog, have no further need for either alarm, indignation, or self-defense, your prickles are soothed into an agreeable passiveness, and you partially cease to feel. That is all. The change you complain of is thus accounted for. You have nothing to feel about. Hence you cannot comprehend how it was that you ever felt. I was conscious of irritation at the calm conviction of his tone. "Do you take me for such a callous creature as all that?" I exclaimed. "You are mistaken in me, Lucio. I feel most keenly." "What do you feel?" he inquired, fixing his eyes steadily upon me. "There are hundreds of starving wretches in this metropolis, men and women on the brink of suicide because they have no hope of anything in this world or the next, and no sympathy from their kind. Do you feel for them? Do their griefs affect you? You know they do not. You know you never think of them. Why should you? One of the chief advantages of wealth is the ability it gives us to shut out other people's miseries from our personal consideration." I said nothing. For the first time my spirit chafed at the truth of his words, principally because they were true. Alas, Lucio, if I had only known then what I know now. "Yesterday," he went on in the same quiet voice, "a child was run over here, just opposite this hotel. It was only a poor child, mark that, only. Its mother ran shrieking out of some back street hard by, in time to see the little bleeding body carted up in a mangled heap. She struck wildly with both hands at the men who were trying to lead her away, and with a cry like that of some hurt savage animal fell face forward in the mud, dead. She was only a poor woman. Another, only. There were 3 lines in the paper about it, headed, "Sad Incident." The hotel porter here witnessed the scene from the door with as composed a demeanour as that of a fop at the play, never relaxing the serene majesty of his attitude, but about 10 minutes after the dead body of the woman had been carried out of sight, he, the imperial, gold-buttoned being, became almost crook-backed in his servile haste to run and open the door of your brougham, my dear Geoffrey, as you drove up to the entrance. This is a little epitome of life, as it is lived nowadays, and yet the canting clerics swear we are all equal in the sight of heaven. We may be, though it does not look much like it, and if we are, it does not matter, as we have ceased to care how heaven regards us. I don't want to point a morale. I simply tell you the sad incident as it occurred, and I am sure you are not the least sorry for the fate of either the child who was run over or its mother who died in the sharp agony of a suddenly broken heart. Now don't say you are, because I know you're not. How can one feel sorry for people one does not know or has never seen? I began. Exactly. How is it possible? And there we have it. How can one feel when oneself is so thoroughly comfortable as to be without any other feeling save that of material ease? Thus, my dear Geoffrey, you must be content to let your book appear as the reflex and record of your past when you were in the prickly or sensitive stage. Now you are encased in a pachydermatous covering of gold, which adequately protects you from such influences as might have made you start and writhe, perhaps even roar with indignation, and in the access of fierce torture, stretch out your hands and grasp, quite unconsciously, the winged thing called fame. You should have been an orator, I said, rising and pacing the room to and fro in vexation. But to me, your words are not consoling, and I do not think they are true. Fame is easily enough secured. Pardon me if I am obstinate, said Lucio with a deprecatory gesture. Notoriety is easily secured, very easily. A few critics who have dined with you and had their fill of wine will give you notoriety, but fame is the voice of the whole civilized public of the world. The public, I echoed contemptuously. The public only care for trash. It is a pity you should appeal to it then, he responded with a smile. If you think so little of the public, why give it anything of your brain? It is not worthy of so rare a boon. Come, come, Tempest. Do not join in the snarl of unsuccessful authors who take refuge, when marked unsaleable, in pouring out abuse on the public. The public is the author's best friend and truest critic. But if you prefer to despise it, in company with all the very little literature mongers who form a mutual admiration society, I tell you what to do. Print just 20 copies of your book and present these to the leading reviewers, and when they have written you up, as they will do, I'll take care of that, let your publisher advertise to the effect that the first and second large editions of the new novel by Geoffrey Tempest are exhausted, 100,000 copies having been sold in a week. If that does not waken up the world in general, I shall be much surprised. I laughed. I was gradually getting into a better humour. It would be quite as fair a plan of action as is adopted by many modern publishers, I said. The loud hawking of literary wares nowadays reminds me of the rival shouting of costermongers in a low neighbourhood. But I will not go quite so far. I'll win my fame legitimately if I can. You can't, declared Lucio with a serene smile. It's impossible. You are too rich. That of itself is not legitimate in literature, which great art generally elects to wear poverty in its buttonhole as a flower of grace. The fight cannot be equal in such circumstances. The fact that you are a millionaire must weigh the balance apparently in your favor for a time. The world cannot resist money. If I, for example, became an author, I should probably, with my wealth and influence, burn up everyone else's laurels. Suppose that a desperately poor man comes out with a book at the same time as you do, he will have scarcely the ghost of a chance against you. He will not be able to advertise in your lavish style, nor will he see his way to dine the critics as you can. And if he should happen to have more genius than you, and you succeed, your success will not be legitimate. But after all, that does not matter much. In art, if in nothing else, things always right themselves. I made no immediate reply, but went over to my table, rolled up my corrected proofs, and directed them to the printers. Then, ringing the bell, I gave the packet to my man, Morris, bidding him post it at once. This done, I turned again towards Lucio and saw that he still sat by the fire, but that his attitude was now one of brooding melancholy, and that he had covered his eyes with one hand on which the glow from the flames shone red. I regretted the momentary irritation I had felt against him for telling me unwelcome truths, and I touched him lightly on the shoulder. "Are you in the dumps now, Lucio?" I said. "I'm afraid my depression has proved infectious." He moved his hand and looked up. His eyes were large and lustrous as the eyes of a beautiful woman. "I was thinking," he said, with a slight sigh, "of the last words I uttered just now. Things always right themselves. Curiously enough, in art they always do. No charlatanism or sham lasts with the gods of Parnassus, but in other matters it is different. For instance, I shall never right myself. Life is hateful to me at times, as it is to everybody." "Perhaps you are in love," I said with a smile. He started up. "In love? By all the heavens and all the earths too, that suggestion wakes me with a vengeance. In love? What woman alive do you think could impress me with the notion that she was anything more than a frivolous doll of pink and white, with long hair frequently not her own? And as for the tomboy tennis players and giantesses of the era, I do not consider them women at all. They are merely the unnatural and strutting embryos of a new sex which will be neither male nor female. My dear Tempest, I hate women. So would you if you knew as much about them as I do. They have made me what I am, and they keep me so." "They are to be much complimented, then," I observed. "You do them credit." "I do," he answered slowly, "in more ways than one." A faint smile was on his face, and his eyes brightened with that curious jewel-like gleam I had noticed several times before. "Believe me, I shall never contest with you such a slight gift as woman's love, Geoffrey. It is not worth fighting for. And apropos of women, that reminds me. I have promised to take you to the Earl of Elton's box at the Haymarket tonight. He is a poor peer, very gouty, and somewhat heavily flavoured with port wine, but his daughter, Lady Sybil, is one of the belles of England. She was presented last season and created quite a furore. Will you come?" "I am quite at your disposition," I said, glad of any excuse to escape the dullness of my own company and to be in that of Lucio, whose talk, even if its satire galled me occasionally, always fascinated my mind and remained in my memory. "What time shall we meet?" "Go and dress now and join me at dinner," he answered, "and we'll drive together to the theatre afterwards. The play is on the usual theme which has lately become popular with stage managers, the glorification of a fallen lady, and the exhibition of her as an example of something superlatively pure and good to the astonished eyes of the innocent. As a play it is not worth seeing, but perhaps Lady Sybil is." He smiled again as he stood facing me. The light flames of the fire had died down to a dull, uniform coppery red. We were almost in darkness, and I pressed the small button near the mantelpiece that flooded the room with electric light. His extraordinary beauty then struck me afresh as something altogether singular and half unearthly. "Don't you find that people look at you very often as you pass, Lucio?" I asked him suddenly and impulsively. He laughed. "Not at all? Why should they? Every man is so intent on his own aims and thinks so much of his own personality that he would scarcely forget his ego if the very devil himself were behind him. Women look at me sometimes, with the affected coy and kitten-like interest usually exhibited by the frail sex for a personable man." "I cannot blame them," I answered, my gaze still resting on his stately figure and fine head, with as much admiration as I might have felt for a noble picture or statue. "What of this Lady Sybil we are to meet tonight? How does she regard you?" "Lady Sybil has never seen me," he replied, "and I have only seen her at a distance. It is chiefly for the purpose of an introduction to her that the Earl has asked us to his box this evening." "Ha ha! Matrimony in view," I exclaimed jestingly. Yes, I believe Lady Sybil is for sale, he answered with the callous coldness that occasionally distinguished him and made his handsome features look like an impenetrable mask of scorn. But up to the present, the bids have not been sufficiently high, and I shall not purchase. I have told you already, Tempest, I hate women. Seriously? Most seriously. Women have always done me harm. They have wantonly hindered me in my progress. And why I specially abominate them is that they have been gifted with an enormous power for doing good, and that they let this power run to waste and will not use it. Their deliberate enjoyment and choice of the repulsive, vulgar and commonplace side of life disgust me. They are much less sensitive than men, and infinitely more heartless. They are the mothers of the human race, and the faults of the race are chiefly due to them. That is another reason for my hatred. Do you want the human race to be perfect? I asked, astonished. Because if you do, you will find that impossible. He stood for a moment, apparently lost in thought. Everything in the universe is perfect, he said, except that curious piece of work, man. Have you never thought out any reason why he should be the one flaw, the one incomplete creature in a matchless creation? No, I have not, I replied. I take things as I find them. So do I. And he turned away. And as I find them, so they find me. Au revoir. Dinner in an hour's time, remember. The door opened and closed. He was gone. I remained alone for a little, thinking what a strange disposition was his, what a curious mixture of philosophy, worldliness, sentiment, and satire seemed to run like the veins of a leaf through the variable temperament of this brilliant, semi-mysterious personage who had by mere chance become my greatest friend. We had now been more or less together for nearly a month, and I was no closer to the secret of his actual nature than I had been at first. Yet I admired him more than ever. Without his society, I felt life would be deprived of half its charm. For though, attracted as human moths will be by the glare of my glittering millions, numbers of so-called friends now surrounded me, there was not one among them who so dominated my every mood and with whom I had so much close sympathy as this man, this masterful, half-cruel, half-kind companion of my days, who at times seemed to accept all life as the veriest bagatelle and myself as a part of the trivial game. Yichtam. No man, I think, ever forgets the first time he is brought face to face with perfect beauty in woman. He may have caught fleeting glimpses of loveliness on many fair faces often, bright eyes may have flashed on him like starbeams, the hues of a dazzling complexion may now and then have charmed him, or the seductive outlines of a graceful figure. All these are as mere peeps into the infinite. But when such vague and passing impressions are suddenly drawn together in one focus, when all his dreamy fancies of form and colour take visible and complete manifestation in one living creature who looks down upon him as it were from an empyrean of untouched maiden pride and purity, it is more to his honour than his shame if his senses swoon at the ravishing vision, and he, despite his rough masculinity and brute strength, becomes nothing but the merest slave to passion. In this way was I overwhelmed and conquered without any chance of deliverance, when Sybil Elton's violet eyes, lifted slowly from the shadow of their dark lashes, rested upon me with that indefinable expression of mingled interest and indifference which is supposed to indicate high breeding, but which more frequently intimidates and repulses the frank and sensitive soul. The Lady Sybil's glance repelled, but I was none the less attracted. Romanes and I had entered the Earl of Elton's box at the Haymarket between the first and second acts of the play, and the Earl himself, an unimpressive, bald-headed, red-faced old gentleman with fuzzy white whiskers, had risen to welcome us, seizing the prince's hand and shaking it with particular effusiveness. I learned afterwards that Lucio had lent him £1,000 on easy terms, a fact which partly accounted for the friendly fervour of his greeting. His daughter had not moved, but a minute or two later, when he addressed her somewhat sharply, saying, "Sybil, Prince Romanes and his friend, Mr. Geoffrey Tempest," she turned her head and honoured us both with the chill glance I have endeavoured to describe. and the very faintest possible bow as an acknowledgment of our presence. Her exquisite beauty smote me dumb and foolish. I could find nothing to say, and stood silent and confused, with a strange sensation of bewilderment upon me. The old earl made some remark about the play, which I scarcely heard, though I answered vaguely and at haphazard. The orchestra was playing abominably, as is usual in theatres, and its brazen din sounded like the noise of the sea in my ears. I had not much real consciousness of anything save the wondrous loveliness of the girl who faced me, clad in pure white, with a few diamonds shining about her like stray dewdrops on a rose. Lucio spoke to her, and I listened. "At last, Lady Sybil," he said, bending towards her deferentially. "At last I have the honour of meeting you. I have seen you often as one sees a star, at a distance." She smiled, a smile so slight and cold that it scarcely lifted the corners of her lovely lips. "I do not think I have ever seen you," she replied, "and yet there is something oddly familiar in your face. I have heard my father speak of you constantly. I need scarcely say his friends are always mine." He bowed. "To merely speak to Lady Sybil Elton is counted sufficient to make the man so privileged happy," he said. "To be her friend is to discover the lost paradise." She flushed, then grew suddenly very pale, and shivering, she drew her cloak towards her. Rimanes wrapped its perfumed silken folds carefully round her beautiful shoulders. How I grudged him the dainty task! He then turned to me and placed a chair just behind hers. "Will you sit here, Geoffrey?" he suggested. "I want to have a moment's business chat with Lord Elton." Recovering my self-possession a little, I hastened to take the chance he thus generously gave me to ingratiate myself in the young lady's favour, and my heart gave a foolish bound of joy because she smiled encouragingly as I approached her. "You are a great friend of Prince Rimanes?" she asked softly as I sat down. "Yes, we are very intimate," I replied. "He is a delightful companion." "So I should imagine," and she looked over at him, where he sat next to her father, talking earnestly in low tones. "He is singularly handsome." I made no reply. Of course, Lucio's extraordinary personal attractiveness was undeniable, but I rather grudged her praise bestowed on him just then. Her remark seemed to me as tactless as when a man with one pretty woman beside him loudly admires another in her hearing. I did not myself assume to be actually handsome, but I knew I was better looking than the ordinary run of men. So out of sudden pique, I remained silent, and presently the curtain rose and the play was resumed. A very questionable scene was enacted, the woman with the past being well to the front of it. I felt disgusted at the performance and looked at my companions to see if they too were similarly moved. There was no sign of disapproval on Lady Sybil's fair countenance. Her father was bending forward eagerly, apparently gloating over every detail. Rimanes wore that inscrutable expression of his in which no feeling whatever could be discerned. The woman with the past went on with her hysterical sham heroics, and the mealy-mouthed fool of a hero declared her to be a pure angel wronged, and the curtain fell amid loud applause. One energetic hiss came from the gallery, affecting the occupants of the stalls to scandalized amazement. "England has progressed," said Rimanes in soft, half-bantering tones. "Once upon a time this play would have been hooted off the stage as likely to corrupt the social community, but now the only voice of protest comes from the lower classes." "Are you a Democrat, Prince?" inquired Lady Sybil, waving her fan indolently to and fro. "Not I. I always insist on the pride and supremacy of worth. I do not mean money value, but intellect. And in this way I foresee a new aristocracy. When the high grows corrupt, it falls and becomes the low. When the low educates itself and aspires, it becomes the high. This is simply the course of nature." "But God bless my soul," exclaimed Lord Elton. "You don't call this play low or immoral, do you?" "It's a realistic study of modern social life. That's what it is. These women, you know, these poor souls with a past, are very interesting." "Very," murmured his daughter. "In fact, it would seem that for women with no such past there can be no future. Virtue and modesty are quite out of date and have no chance whatever." I leaned towards her, half whispering, "Lady Sybil, I am glad to see this wretched play offends you." She turned her deep eyes on me in mingled surprise and amusement. "Oh no, it doesn't," she declared. "I have seen so many like it, and I have read so many novels on just the same theme. I assure you, I am quite convinced that the so-called bad woman is the only popular type of our sex with men. She gets all the enjoyment possible out of life. She frequently makes an excellent marriage, and has, as the Americans say, a good time all round. It's the same thing with our convicted criminals. In prison they are much better fed than the honest working man. I believe it is quite a mistake for women to be respectable. They are only considered dull." "Ah, now you are only joking," I said, with an indulgent smile. "You know that in your heart you think very differently." She made no answer, as just then the curtain went up again, disclosing the unclean lady of the piece, having a good time all round, on board a luxurious yacht. During the unnatural and stilted dialogue which followed, I withdrew a little back into the shadow of the box, and all that self-esteem and assurance of which I had been suddenly deprived by a glance at Lady Sybil's beauty came back to me, and a perfectly stolid coolness and composure succeeded to the first feverish excitement of my mind. I recalled Lucio's words, "I believe Lady Sybil is for sale," and I thought triumphantly of my millions. I glanced at the old Earl, abjectly pulling at his white whiskers while he listened anxiously to what were evidently money schemes propounded by Lucio. Then my gaze came back appraisingly to the lovely curves of Lady Sybil's milk-white throat, her beautiful arms and bosom, her rich brown hair of the shade of a ripe chestnut, her delicate, haughty face, languid eyes, and brilliant complexion. And I murmured inwardly, "All this loveliness is purchasable, and I will purchase it." At that very instant she turned to me and said, "You are the famous Mr. Tempest, are you not?" "Famous?" I echoed with a deep sense of gratification. "Well, I am scarcely that. Yet, my book is not published." Her eyebrows arched themselves surprisedly. "Your book? I did not know you had written one." My flattered vanity sank to zero. "It has been extensively advertised," I began impressively, but she interrupted me with a laugh. "Oh, I never read advertisements. It's too much trouble. When I asked if you were the famous Mr. Tempest, I meant to say, were you the great millionaire who has been so much talked of lately?" I bowed a somewhat chill assent. She looked at me inquisitively over the lace edge of her fan. "How delightful it must be for you to have so much money," she said. "And you are young, too, and good-looking." Pleasure took the place of vexed amour-propre, and I smiled. "You are very kind, Lady Sybil." "Why?" she asked, laughing. Such a delicious little low laugh. "Because I tell you the truth. You are young and you are good-looking. Millionaires are generally such appalling creatures. Fortune, while giving them money, frequently deprives them of both brains and personal attractiveness. And now, do tell me about your book." She seemed to have suddenly dispensed with her former reserve, and during the last act of the play we conversed freely, in whispers, which assisted us to become almost confidential. Her manner to me now was full of grace and charm, and the fascination she exerted over my senses became complete. The performance over, we all left the box together, and as Lucio was still apparently engrossed with Lord Elton, I had the satisfaction of escorting Lady Sybil to her carriage. When her father joined her, Lucio and I both stood together looking in at the window of the brougham, and the Earl, getting hold of my hand, shook it up and down with boisterous friendliness. "Come and dine, come and dine," he spluttered excitedly. "Come, let me see, this is Tuesday, come on Thursday. Short notice and no ceremony. My wife is paralyzed, I'm sorry to say. She can't receive. She can only see a few people now and then when she's in the humor. Her sister keeps house and does the honors. Aunt Charlotte, eh, Sybil? Ha ha ha. The deceased wife's sister's bill would never be any use to me, for if my wife were to die, I shouldn't be anxious to marry Miss Charlotte Fitzroy. Ha 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 ha. A perfectly unapproachable woman, sir. A model. Ha ha ha. Come and dine with us, Mr. Tempest. Lucio, you bring him along with you, eh? We've got a young lady staying with us, an American, dollars. accent and all, and by Jove, I believe she wants to marry me, ha ha ha, and is waiting for Lady Elton to go to a better world first, ha ha. Come along. Come and see the little American, eh? Thursday shall it be? Over the fair features of Lady Sybil there passed a faint shadow of annoyance at her father's allusion to the little American, but she said nothing. Only her looks appeared to question our intentions as well as to persuade our wills, and she seemed satisfied when we both accepted the invitation given. Another apoplectic chuckle from the Earl, and a couple of handshakes, a slight, graceful bow from her lovely ladyship as we raised our hats in farewell, and the Elton equipage rolled away, leaving us to enter our own vehicle, which amid the officious roarings of street boys and policemen had just managed to draw up in front of the theatre. As we drove off, Lucio peered inquisitively at me. I could see the steely glitter of his fine eyes in the semi-darkness of the brougham, and said, "Well?" I was silent. "Don't you admire her?" he went on. "I must confess she is cold, a very chilly vestal indeed, but snow often covers volcanoes. She has good features and a naturally clear complexion." Despite my intention to be reticent, I could not endure this tame description. "She is perfectly beautiful," I said emphatically. "The dullest eyes must see that. There is not a fault to be found with her, and she is wise to be reserved and cold. Were she too lavish of her smiles and too seductive in manner, she might drive many men not only into folly, but madness." I felt, rather than saw, the cat-like glance he flashed upon me. "Positively, Geoffrey, I believe that notwithstanding the fact that we are only in February, the wind blows upon you due south, bringing with it odours of rose and orange blossom. I fancy Lady Sybil has powerfully impressed you." "Did you wish me to be impressed?" I asked. "Aye, my dear fellow, I wish nothing that you yourself do not wish. I accommodate my ways to my friends' humours. If asked for my opinion, I should say it is rather a pity if you are really smitten with the young lady, as there are no obstacles to be encountered. A love affair, to be conducted with spirit and enterprise, should always bristle with opposition and difficulty, real or invented. A little secrecy and a good deal of wrongdoing, such as sly assignations and the telling of any amount of lies. Such things add to the agreeableness of love-making on this planet." I interrupted him. "See here, Lucio, you are very fond of alluding to this planet, as if you knew anything about other planets," I said impatiently. "This planet, as you somewhat contemptuously call it, is the only one we have any business with." He bent his piercing look so ardently upon me that for the moment I was startled. "If that is so," he answered, "why in heaven's name do you not let the other planets alone? Why do you strive to fathom their mysteries and movements? If men, as you say, have no business with any planet save this one, why are they ever on the alert to discover the secret of mightier worlds, a secret which haply it may some day terrify them to know?" The solemnity of his voice and the inspired expression of his face awed me. I had no reply ready, and he went on, "Do not let us talk, my friend, of planets, not even of this particular pin's point among them known as Earth. Let us return to a better subject, the Lady Sybil. As I have already said, there are no obstacles in the way of your wooing and winning her, if such is your desire. Geoffrey Tempest, as mere author of books, would indeed be insolent to aspire to the hand of an earl's daughter, but Geoffrey Tempest, millionaire, will be a welcome suitor. Poor Lord Elton's affairs are in a bad way. He is almost out at elbows. The American woman who is boarding with him—" "Boarding with him," I exclaimed. "Surely he does not keep a boarding house?" Lucio laughed heartily. "No, no, you must not put it so coarsely, Geoffrey. It is simply this, that the Earl and Countess of Elton give the prestige of their home and protection to Miss Diana Chesney, the American aforesaid, for the trifling sum of 2,000 guineas per annum. The Countess, being paralyzed, is obliged to hand over her duties of chaperonage to her sister, Miss Charlotte Fitzroy, but the halo of the coronet still hovers over Miss Chesney's brow. She has her own suite of rooms in the house, and goes wherever it is proper for her to go, under Miss Fitzroy's care. Lady Sybil does not like the arrangement, and is therefore never seen anywhere except with her father. She will not join in companionship with Miss Chesney, and has said so pretty plainly." "I admire her for it," I said warmly. "I really am surprised that Lord Elton should condescend." "Condescend to what?" inquired Lucio. "Condescend to take 2,000 guineas a year? Good heavens, man, there are no end of lords and ladies who will readily agree to perform such an act of condescension. Blue blood is getting thin and poor, and only money can thicken it. Diana Chesney is worth over $1 million, and if Lady Elton were to die conveniently soon, I should not be surprised to see that little American step triumphantly into her vacant place." "What a state of topsy-turvydom," I said, half angrily. "Geoffrey, my friend, you are really amazingly inconsistent. Is there a more flagrant example of topsy-turvydom than yourself, for instance? 6 weeks ago, what were you? A mere scribbler, with flutterings of the wings of genius in your soul, but many uncertainties as to whether those wings would ever be strong enough to lift you out of the rut of obscurity in which you floundered, struggling and grumbling at adverse fate. Now, as millionaire, you think contemptuously of an earl because he ventures quite legitimately to add a little to his income by boarding an American heiress and launching her into society where she would never get without him. And you aspire, or probably mean to aspire, to the hand of the earl's daughter, as if you yourself were a descendant of kings. Nothing can be more topsy-turvy than your condition." "My father was a gentleman," I said, with a touch of hauteur, "and a descendant of gentlemen. We were never common folk. Our family was one of the most highly esteemed in the counties." Lucio smiled. "I do not doubt it, my dear fellow. I do not in the least doubt it. But a simple gentleman is a long way below or above an earl. Have it which side you choose, because it really doesn't matter nowadays. We have come to a period of history when rank and lineage count as nothing at all, owing to the profoundly obtuse stupidity of those who happen to possess it. So it chances that as no resistance is made, brewers are created peers of the realm, and ordinary tradesmen are knighted, and the very old families are so poor that they have to sell their estates and jewels to the highest bidder, who is frequently a vulgar railway king or the introducer of some new manure. You occupy a better position than such, since you inherit your money with the farther satisfaction that you do not know how it was made." "True," I answered meditatively. Then, with a sudden flash of recollection, I added, "By the way, I never told you that my deceased relative imagined that he had sold his soul to the devil, and that this vast fortune of his was the material result." Lucio burst into a violent fit of laughter. "No, not possible," he exclaimed derisively. "What an idea! I suppose he had a screw loose somewhere. Imagine any sane man believing in a devil. Ha, 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 and in these advanced days, too. Well, well, the folly of human imaginations will never end. Here we are." And he sprang lightly out as the brougham stopped at the Grand Hotel. "I will say good night to you, Tempest. I've promised to go and have a gamble." "A gamble? Where?" "At one of the select private clubs. There are any amount of them in this eminently moral metropolis. No occasion to go to Monte Carlo. Will you come?" I hesitated. The fair face of Lady Sybil haunted my mind, and I felt, with a no doubt foolish sentimentality, that I would rather keep my thoughts of her sacred and unpolluted by contact with things of lower tone. "Not tonight," I said. Then, half smiling, I added, "It must be rather a one-sided affair for other men to gamble with you, Lucio. You can afford to lose, and perhaps they can't." "If they can't, they shouldn't play," he answered. "A man should at least know his own mind and his own capacity. If he doesn't, he is no man at all. As far as I have learned by long experience, those who gamble like it, and when they like it, I like it. I'll take you with me tomorrow if you care to see the fun. 1 or 2 very eminent men are members of the club, though of course they wouldn't have it known for worlds. You shan't lose much, I'll see to that." "All right, tomorrow it shall be," I responded, for I did not wish to appear as though I grudged losing a few pounds at play. "But tonight I think I'll write some letters before going to bed." "Yes, "And dream of Lady Sybil," said Lucio, laughing. "If she fascinates you as much when you see her again on Thursday, you had better begin the siege." He waved his hand gaily, and re-entering his carriage, was driven off at a furious pace through the drifting fog and rain. Giviati, my publisher, John Morgazon, the estimable individual who had first refused my book, and who now, moved by self-interest, was devoting his energies assiduously to the business of launching it in the most modern and approved style, was not like Shakespeare's Cassio, strictly an honourable man. Neither was he the respectable chief of a long-established firm whose system of the cheating of authors, mellowed by time, had become almost sacred. He was a new man, with new ways, and a good stock of new push and impudence. All the same, he was clever, shrewd, and diplomatic, and for some reason or other had secured the favour of a certain portion of the press, many of the dailies and weeklies always giving special prominence to his publications over the heads of other far more legitimately dealing firms. He entered into a partial explanation of his methods when, on the morning after my first meeting with the Earl of Elton and his daughter, I called upon him to inquire how things were going with regard to my book. "We shall publish next week," he said, rubbing his hands complacently and addressing me with all the deference due to my banking account. "And as you don't mind what you spend, I'll tell you just what I propose to do. I intend to write out a mystifying paragraph of about some 70 lines or so, describing the book in a vague sort of way as likely to create a new era of thought, or, ere long, everybody who is anybody will be compelled to read this remarkable work, or as something that must be welcome to all who would understand the drift of one of the most delicate and burning questions of the time." These are all stock phrases, used over and over again by the reviewers. There's no copyright in them. And the last one always tells wonderfully, considering how old it is, and how often it has been made to do duty, because any allusion to a delicate and burning question makes a number of people think the novel must be improper, and they send for it at once. He chuckled at his own perspicuity, and I sat silent, studying him with much inward amusement. This man, on whose decision I had humbly and anxiously waited not so many weeks ago, was now my paid tool, ready to obey me to any possible extent for so much cash, and I listened to him indulgently while he went on unravelling his schemes for the gratification of my vanity and the pocketing of his extras. "The book has been splendidly advertised," he went on. "It could not have been more lavishly done. Orders do not come in very fast yet, but they will. They will. This paragraph of mine, which will take the shape of a leaderette, I can get inserted in about 800 to 1,000 newspapers here and in America. It will cost you, say 100 guineas, perhaps a trifle more. Do you mind that?" "Not in the least," I replied, still vastly amused. He meditated a moment, then drew his chair closer to mine and lowered his voice a little. "You understand, I suppose, that I shall only issue 250 copies at first." This limited number seemed to me absurd, and I protested vehemently. "Such an idea is ridiculous," I said. "You cannot supply the trade with such a scanty edition." "Wait, my dear sir, wait. You are too impatient. You do not give me time to explain. All these 250 will be given away by me in the proper quarters on the day of publication. Never mind how. They must be given away." "Why?" "Why?" And the worthy Morgazon laughed sweetly. "I see, my dear Mr. Tempest. You are like most men of genius. You do not understand business. The reason why we give the first 250 copies away is in order to be able to announce at once in all the papers that the first large edition of the new novel by Geoffrey Tempest being exhausted on the day of publication, a second is in rapid preparation. You see, we thus hoodwink the public, who of course are not in our secrets, and are not to know whether an edition is 200 or 2,000. The second edition will of course be ready behind the scenes and will consist of another 250. "Do you call that course of procedure honest?" I asked quietly. "Honest? My dear sir, honest?" And his countenance wore a virtuously injured expression. "Of course it is honest. Look at the daily papers. Such announcements appear every day. In fact, they are getting rather too common." I freely admit that there are a few publishers here and there who stick up for exactitude and go to the trouble of not only giving the number of copies in an edition, but also publishing the date of each one as it was issued. This may be principle if they like to call it so, but it involves a great deal of precise calculation and worry. If the public like to be deceived, what is the use of being exact? Now, to resume, your second edition will be sent off on sale or return to provincial booksellers, and then we shall announce. In consequence of the enormous demand for the new novel by Geoffrey Tempest, the large second edition is out of print. A third will be issued in the course of next week. And so on, till we get to the sixth or seventh edition, always numbering 250 each, in 3 volumes. Perhaps we can by skillful management work it to a 10th. It is only a question of diplomacy and a little dexterous humbugging of the trade. Then we shall arrive at the 1-volume issue, which will require different handling. But there's time enough for that. The frequent advertisements will add to the expense a bit, but if you don't mind— I don't mind anything, I said, so long as I have my fun. Your fun? He queried surprisedly. I thought it was fame you wanted, more than fun. I laughed aloud. I'm not such a fool as to suppose that fame is secured by advertisement, I said. For instance, I am one of those who think the fame of Millet as an artist was marred when he degraded himself to the level of painting the little green boy blowing bubbles of Piers's soap. That was an advertisement. And that very incident in his career, trifling though it seems, will prevent his ever standing on the same dignified height of distinction with such masters in art as Romney, Sir Peter Lely, Gainsborough, or Reynolds. I believe there is a great deal of justice in what you say, and Morgeson shook his head wisely. Viewed from a purely artistic and sentimental standpoint, you are right. And he became suddenly downcast and dubious. Yes, it is a most extraordinary thing how fame does escape people sometimes, just when they seem on the point of grasping it. They are boomed in every imaginable way, and yet after a time nothing will keep them up. And there are others again who get kicked and buffeted and mocked and derided. Like Christ? I interposed with a half-smile. He looked shocked. He was a nonconformist, but remembering in time how rich I was, he bowed with a meek patience. Yes, and he sighed. As you suggest, Mr. Tempest, like Christ. Mocked and derided and opposed at every turn, and yet, by the queerest caprice of destiny, they succeed in winning a worldwide fame and power. Like Christ again, I said mischievously, for I loved to jar his nonconformist conscience. Exactly, he paused, looking piously down. Then with a return of secular animation he added, but I was not thinking of the great example just then, Mr. Tempest. I was thinking of a woman. Indeed, I said indifferently. Yes, a woman who, despite continued abuse and opposition, is rapidly becoming celebrated. You are sure to hear of her in literary and social circles, and he gave me a furtive glance of doubtful inquiry. But she is not rich, you know, only famous. However, we have nothing to do with her just now, so let us return to business. The one uncertain point in the matter of your book's success is the attitude of the critics. There are only 6 leading men who do the reviews, and between them they cover all the English magazines, and some of the American too, as well as the London papers. Here are their names, and he handed me a penciled memorandum. And their addresses, as far as I can ascertain them, or the addresses of the papers for which they most frequently write. The man at the head of the list, David McWing, is the most formidable of the lot. He writes everywhere about everything. Being a Scotchman, he's bound to have his finger in every pie. If you can secure McWing, you need not trouble so much about the others, as he generally gives the lead and has his own way with the editors. He is one of the personal friends of the editor of the 19th century, for example, and you would be sure to get a notice there, which would otherwise be impossible. No reviewer can review anything for that magazine unless he is one of the editor's friends. You must manage McWing, or he might, just for the sake of showing off, cut you up rather roughly. That would not matter, I said, diverted at the idea of managing McWing. A little slating always helps a book to sell. In some cases it does, and Morgeson stroked his thin beard perplexedly. But in others, it most emphatically does not. Where there is any very decided or daring originality, adverse criticism is always the most effective. But a work like yours requires fostering with favour, wants booming, in short. I see, and I felt distinctly annoyed. You don't think my book original enough to stand alone? My dear sir, you are really, what shall I say? And he smiled apologetically. A little brusque? I think your book shows admirable scholarship and delicacy of thought. If I find fault with it at all, it is perhaps because I am dense. The only thing it lacks, in my opinion, is what I should call tenaciousness, for want of a better expression, the quality of holding the reader's fancy fixed like a nail. But after all, this is a common failing of modern literature. Few authors feel sufficiently themselves to make others feel. I made no reply for a moment. I was thinking of Lucio's remarks on this very same subject. Well, I said at last, if I had no feeling when I wrote the book, I certainly have none now. Why, man, I felt every line of it, painfully and intensely. Aye, indeed, said Morgeson soothingly. Or perhaps you thought you felt, which is another very curious phase of the literary temperament. You see, to convince people at all, you must first yourself be convinced. The result of this is generally a singular magnetic attraction between author and public. However, I am a bad hand at argument, and it is possible that in hasty reading I may have gathered a wrong impression of your intentions. Anyhow, the book shall be a success if we can make it so. All I venture to ask of you is that you should personally endeavour to manage McWing. I promised to do my best, and on this understanding we parted. I realized that Morgeson was capable of greater discernment than I had imagined, and his observations had given me material for thought which was not altogether agreeable. For if my book, as he said, lacked tenacity, why then it would not take root in the public mind. It would be merely the ephemeral success of a season, one of those brief booms in literary wares for which I had such unmitigated contempt, and fame would be as far off as ever, except that spurious imitation of it which the fact of my millions had secured. I was in no good humour that afternoon, and Lucio saw it. He soon elicited the sum and substance of my interview with Morgeson, and laughed long and somewhat uproariously over the proposed managing of the redoubtable McWing. He glanced at the 5 names of the other leading critics and shrugged his shoulders. Morgeson is quite right, he said. McWing is intimate with the rest of these fellows. They meet at the same clubs, dine at the same cheap restaurants, and make love to the same painted ballet girls, all in a comfortable little fraternal union together, and one obliges the other on their several journals when occasion offers. Oh yes, I should make up to McWing if I were you. But how? I demanded, for though I knew McWing's name well enough, having seen it signed ad nauseam to literary articles in almost every paper extant, I had never met the man. I cannot ask any favour of a press critic. Of course not, and Lucio laughed heartily again. If you were to do such an idiotic thing, what a slating you'd get for your pains. There's no sport a critic loves so much as the flaying of an author who has made the mistake of lowering himself to the level of asking favours of his intellectual inferiors. No, my dear fellow. We shall manage McWing quite differently. I know him, though you do not. Come, that's good news, I exclaimed. Upon my word, Lucio, you seem to know everybody. I think I know most people worth knowing, responded Lucio quietly, though I by no means include Mr. McWing in the category of worthiness. I happened to make his personal acquaintance in a somewhat singular and exciting manner. It was in Switzerland, on that awkward ledge of rock known as the Mauvais Pas. I had been some weeks in the neighbourhood on business of my own, and being sure-footed and fearless, was frequently allowed by the guides to volunteer my services with theirs. In this capacity of amateur guide, capricious destiny gave me the pleasure of escorting the timid and bilious McWing across the chasms of the Mer de Glace, and I conversed with him in the choicest French all the while, a language of which, despite his boasted erudition, he was deplorably ignorant. I knew who he was, I must tell you, as I know most of his craft, and had long been aware of him as one of the authorized murderers of aspiring genius. When I got him on the Mauvais Pas, I saw that he was seized with vertigo. I held him firmly by the arm and addressed him in sound, strong English thus: "Mr. McWing, you wrote a damnable and scurrilous article against the work of a certain poet, and I named the man, an article that was a tissue of lies from beginning to end, and which by its cruelty and venom embittered a life of brilliant promise and crushed a noble spirit. Now, unless you promise to write and publish in a leading magazine a total recantation of this your crime when you get back to England, if you get back, giving that wronged man the honourable mention he rightly deserves, down you go. I have but to loosen my hold. Geoffrey, you should have seen McWing then. He whined, he wriggled, he clung. Never was an oracle of the press in such an unoracular condition. Murder! Murder! He gasped, but his voice failed him. Above him towered the snow peaks like the summits of that fame he could not reach, and therefore grudged to others. Below him the glittering ice waves yawned in deep transparent hollows of opaline blue and green, and afar off the tinkling cowbells echoed through the still air, suggestive of safe green pastures and happy homes. Murder, he whispered gurglingly. Nay, said I, 'tis I should cry murder, for if ever an arresting hand held a murderer, mine holds one now. Your system of slaying is worse than that of the midnight assassin, for the assassin can but kill the body. You strive to kill the soul. You cannot succeed, 'tis true, but the mere attempt is devilish. No shouts, no struggles will serve you here. We are alone with eternal nature. Give the man you have slandered his tardy recognition, or else, as I said before, down you go. Well, to make my story short, he yielded and swore to do as I bade him, whereupon, placing my arm round him as though he were my tender twin brother, I led him safely off the Mauvais Pas and down the kindlier hill, where, what with the fright and the remains of vertigo, he fell a-weeping grievously. Would you believe it, that before we reached Chamonix we had become the best friends in the world? He explained himself and his rascally modes of action, and I nobly exonerated him. We exchanged cards, and when we parted, this same author's bugbear McWing, overcome with sentiment and whisky, Toddy, he is a Scotchman, you know, swore that I was the grandest fellow in the world, and that if ever he could serve me he would. He knew my princely title by this time, but he would have given me a still higher name. You are not, a poet yourself, he murmured, leaning on me fondly as he rolled to bed. I told him no. I am sorry. Very, he declared, the tears of whisky rising to his eyes. If you had been, I would have done a great thing for you. I would have boomed you, for nothing. I left him snoring nobly, and saw him no more. But I think he'll recognize me, Geoffrey. I'll go and look him up personally. By all the gods, if he had only known who held him between life and death upon the Mauvais Pas. I stared, puzzled. But he did know, I said. Did you not say you exchanged cards? True, but that was afterwards, and Lucio laughed. I assure you, my dear fellow, we can manage McWing. I was intensely interested in the story as he told it. He had such a dramatic way of speaking and looking, while his very gestures brought the whole scene vividly before me like a picture. I spoke out my thought impulsively. You would certainly have made a superb actor, Lucio. How do you know I am not one? He asked with a flashing glance. Then he added quickly, No, there is no occasion to paint the face and prance over the boards before a row of tawdry footlights like the paid mimes in order to be histrionically great. The finest actor is he who can play the comedy of life perfectly, as I aspire to do. To walk well, talk well, smile well, weep well, groan well, laugh well, and die well. It is all pure acting, because in every man there is the dumb, dreadful, immortal spirit who is real, who cannot act, who is, and who steadily maintains an infinite though speechless protest against the body's lie. I said nothing in answer to this outburst. I was beginning to be used to his shifting humours and strange utterances. They increased the mysterious attraction I had for him, and made his character a perpetual riddle to me, which was not without its subtle charm. Every now and then I realized, with a faintly startled sense of self-abasement, that I was completely under his dominance, that my life was being entirely guided by his control and suggestion, but I argued with myself that surely it was well it should be so, seeing he had so much more experience and influence than I. We dined together that night as we often did, and our conversation was entirely taken up with monetary and business concerns. Under Lucio's advice, I was making several important investments, and these matters gave us ample subject for discussion. At about 11 o'clock, it being a fine frosty evening and fit for brisk walking, we went out, our destination being the private gambling club to which my companion had volunteered to introduce me as a guest. It was situated at the end of a mysterious little back street, not far from the respectable precincts of Pall Mall, and was an unpretentious-looking house, enough outside, but within it was sumptuously though tastelessly furnished. Apparently, the premises were presided over by a woman with painted eyes and dyed hair, who received us first of all within the lamp-lighted splendors of an Anglo-Japanese drawing-room. Her looks and manner undisguisedly proclaimed her as a demi-mondaine of the most pronounced type, one of those pure ladies with a past who are represented as such martyrs to the vices of men. Lucio said something to her apart, whereupon she glanced at me deferentially and smiled, then rang the bell. A discreet-looking manservant in sober black made his appearance, and at a slight sign from his mistress, who bowed to me as I passed her, proceeded to show us upstairs. We trod on a carpet of the softest felt. In fact, I noticed that everything was rendered as noiseless as possible in this establishment, the very doors being covered with thick baize and swinging on silent hinges. On the upper landing, the servant knocked very cautiously at a side door. A key turned in the lock, and we were admitted into a long double room, very brilliantly lit with electric lamps, which at a first glance seemed crowded with men playing at rouge et noir and baccarat. Some looked up as Lucio entered and nodded smilingly. Others glanced inquisitively at me, but our entrance was otherwise scarcely noticed. Lucio, drawing me along by the arm, sat down to watch the play. I followed his example, and presently found myself infected by the intense excitement which permeated the room, like the silent tension of the air before a thunderstorm. I recognized the faces of many well-known public men, men eminent in politics and society, whom one would never have imagined capable of supporting a gambling club by their presence and authority. But I took care to betray no sign of surprise, and quietly observed the games and the gamesters with almost as impassive a demeanor as that of my companion. I was prepared to play and to lose. I was not prepared, however, for the strange scene which was soon to occur, and in which I, by force of circumstances, was compelled to take a leading part.